What if I told you the most powerful way to deal with toxic people is to do absolutely nothing? Not silence out of weakness, but silence that shakes them. Smart people don't fight fire with fire, they remove the oxygen. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how to stop feeding the chaos and start taking back control of your peace, your time, and your life. Most people think the loudest person in the room has the most control. They think that if someone raises their voice, pushes your buttons, and gets under your skin, the best way to respond is to match their energy, fight fire with fire. But here's the truth: the person who stays calm, who doesn't flinch, who doesn't get pulled into the chaos, that's the one with the real power. Reactivity is what toxic people thrive on. Their entire strategy, whether they're consciously doing it or not, is to create a storm so loud that you lose your footing. And when you lose your footing, they win. But when you learn to observe without absorbing, when you can see the chaos and decide not to join it, you instantly shift the balance of power. You regain control, not just of the moment, but of yourself. And that's what makes all the difference. Staying calm isn't about being passive. It's not about rolling over and letting someone disrespect you. It's about learning how to separate emotion from action. It's about developing the skill of strategic stillness. Think about it. When someone is trying to get a rise out of you and you don't give them the satisfaction, you're essentially rewiring the dynamic in real time. You're showing that your emotional state isn't dictated by their behavior. You're training your nervous system to respond, not react. This has a biological basis. When you pause before reacting, when you give yourself even a few seconds, you're allowing the prefrontal cortex, the logical part of your brain, to stay in charge instead of letting the amygdala, the reactive part, take the wheel. And this small shift is where massive transformation begins. Emotional regulation is a superpower, and smart people develop it with practice. They breathe before they speak. They observe before they act. And they understand that restraint doesn't mean weakness. It means mastery. Think of a toxic person like someone throwing emotional grenades into your space. The moment you pick one up and throw it back, you've entered their game. But if you let it land, look at it, and simply step aside, you've just broken the cycle. You've proven to yourself that your peace doesn't depend on their behavior. That kind of control, it changes everything. It disarms the situation, and more importantly, it protects your mind. The most intelligent people aren't the ones who win the argument. They're the ones who don't need to argue at all. They know that walking away with dignity is more powerful than winning a shouting match. They realize that not every battle is worth fighting, especially when the opponent is addicted to drama. You don't need to justify your calm. You don't need to defend your peace. Your life speaks louder when you don't waste time proving your worth to someone who's not listening. You're not responsible for someone else's chaos. You're responsible for how you carry yourself through it. The more you train yourself to respond calmly under pressure, the more you begin to shift the trajectory of your life. Your decisions get sharper, your relationships get healthier, and your sense of inner strength becomes unshakable. This kind of composure doesn't happen overnight, but when you commit to it, it rewires everything. Your silence, your breath, your choice not to react. That is your power. Use it. Toxic people are masters at making you question your own reality. They twist words, manipulate emotions, and often blur the lines between what really happened and what they want you to believe happened. The smartest way to deal with that, you anchor yourself in truth, your truth, because the moment you start doubting your own perception, you've already started to lose control. And that's exactly what they want. When you deal with someone toxic, clarity becomes your greatest weapon. You can't rely on them to be honest, fair, or even remotely self-aware. So what you need is a solid internal compass. That means knowing your values, standing by your boundaries, and recognizing gaslighting for what it is. The second you feel yourself getting pulled into circular conversations or being blamed for things that don't make sense, stop. That's not communication. It's manipulation dressed up as dialogue. This is where self-awareness becomes non-negotiable. If you're constantly trying to explain yourself to someone who's committed to misunderstanding you, you'll run yourself into the ground. You'll feel exhausted, not just mentally but physically, because your brain is constantly working overtime trying to find logic in something that was never meant to be logical. So instead of over-explaining, start observing. Observe their patterns, their inconsistencies, the way they flip the script. Take mental notes, not to keep score, but to remind yourself you're not crazy, you're being manipulated. You don't need to argue with someone to validate what you know is true. You don't have to get them to agree in order to believe yourself. The smartest people stop chasing validation from the very people who benefit from keeping them confused. Instead, they practice quiet confidence. They let their clarity speak louder than the chaos around them. They don't get baited into arguments, and they don't try to fix people who aren't asking to be fixed. Every time you reinforce a boundary, even silently, you remind yourself that your peace matters. You reclaim a little bit of your power. It could be as simple as not answering a baiting text, not rising to an obvious provocation, or even just taking a breath before you speak. These small moments of resistance build resilience. And over time, they create a version of you that no toxic person can bend, break, or manipulate. Don't mistake detachment for indifference. Detachment is a sign of clarity. It's knowing that just because someone throws emotional chaos your way doesn't mean you need to catch it. It's understanding that you can care about someone and still choose to protect yourself. That's not selfish. That's survival. And it's smart, because when you stop trying to get the wrong people to understand your worth, you make space for the right ones who already see it. So instead of engaging in every fight, trying to prove yourself, or rewriting your reality to suit someone else's narrative, step back. Trust your instincts. Lean into your calm. Know your truth so well that no one else's noise can shake it. And remember, when you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, you give yourself permission to live freely, fully, and with strength. You owe no one your peace, especially not those who thrive on taking it. Toxic people thrive on reaction. Their power comes not from what they say or do, but from how you respond. Every time you react emotionally, every time you defend yourself, explain yourself, or try to reason with someone who isn't interested in truth, you're feeding the very cycle that drains you. The smartest shift you can make isn't in what you say to them. It's in what you choose not to say. Emotional neutrality is one of the most effective tools for protecting your mental space. Here's why: when someone is trying to control or manipulate you, they're not looking for resolution. They're looking for control over your emotional state. If they can get a rise out of you, if they can make you doubt yourself or lash out, they win. Not because they're right, but because they've pulled you into their world, their rules, their drama. And when you're in their space, you lose access to your calm, your clarity, and your composure. That's the real cost. Now imagine instead that you stay still. Not cold, not cruel, just centered. You don't argue, you don't defend, you don't even engage beyond what's necessary. You answer with calm, you set limits, and then you detach. That neutrality doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about your well-being not to get dragged into chaos. It's not passive, it's powerful. Because the hardest thing to do when you're being triggered is to stay grounded. But that's exactly what turns the tables. There's a physiological reason this works, too. When you keep your nervous system regulated, your breathing steady, your tone calm, your posture relaxed, you're training your body not to let external stress take control of your internal world. That practice, over time, rewires how you show up in the most challenging moments. It turns reaction into choice. You stop being at the mercy of someone else's mood or manipulation. This isn't about pretending you don't feel anything. It's about learning how to process those feelings before you respond. It's about building a pause between stimulus and response where you get to choose your next move. That pause, that moment where you choose calm over chaos, is where real strength lies. It's what allows you to take control of situations that once left you feeling powerless. It also changes the dynamic completely. When someone used to your reactions sees they can no longer get them, they start losing control. They realize the old tactics don't work anymore. That silence, that lack of reaction, it's not weakness, it's information. It tells them loud and clear, you're not available for emotional games anymore. And that can be more powerful than any argument you could ever win. The truth is, not every battle deserves your energy. And the more you protect your peace, the more selective you become about where you invest your emotional bandwidth. Toxic people aren't looking for resolution, they're looking for control. Take that away, and all that's left is their own reflection. What you're doing is not about changing them, it's about transforming the way you show up. When you master neutrality, you become unshakable. You move through conflict without letting it define you. You hold your ground, not with force, but with focus. That's how you stop letting people pull you into storms that aren't yours to fight. That's how you reclaim your power without ever having to raise your voice. Power doesn't always look loud. It often looks like calm. One of the most overlooked yet transformative shifts in how we handle toxic people is learning to stop trying to make them understand us. It's a deeply human instinct. We want to be seen, heard, validated. We think that if we can just explain ourselves clearly enough, they'll get it, they'll change, they'll meet us halfway. But the truth is, when someone is committed to misunderstanding you, no amount of explanation will bridge that gap. In fact, constantly explaining yourself to someone who has no interest in understanding you doesn't just waste energy. It erodes your self-worth, because every time you try to win them over with your point of view, every time you plead for clarity or connection from someone who isn't offering it back, you're placing your emotional stability in their hands. You're asking someone who isn't invested in your well-being to validate your reality. And when they don't, it leaves you even more confused and drained than before. Here's the truth: you don't need to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You don't need to spend your life turning yourself inside out trying to earn empathy from someone who withholds it as a form of control. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to stop explaining and start observing. To realize that clarity doesn't always come from communication. It often comes from recognizing patterns. There's a deep strength in being able to say, I see what this is, and I don't need you to see it too in order to take care of myself. That's where your power begins. When you stop handing out explanations like apologies, when you stop trying to gain approval from someone who weaponizes confusion, you reclaim your emotional space. You begin to validate yourself from within, instead of outsourcing that validation to people who will never give it freely. And physiologically, this has a profound impact. Every time you resist the urge to over-explain, you're breaking the feedback loop between emotional discomfort and external reassurance. You're teaching your nervous system that you don't need resolution with another person to feel settled within yourself. That autonomy is what builds resilience, not just mentally, but biologically. Your baseline stress levels drop, your emotional reactions become more measured, and you stop living in a state of hyper-vigilance, constantly scanning for approval or threat. When you stop trying to make them understand, something else happens too. You create space. Space to focus on your own healing, your own growth, your own truth. You give yourself permission to disengage without guilt. You stop chasing closure from the person who broke you open in the first place. And that space becomes a kind of clarity in itself. It's where you start to rebuild, not from reaction, but from intention. You begin to understand that not everyone is meant to walk with you. Some people are detours, lessons, mirrors. And once the lesson is clear, you're free to move forward without needing them to acknowledge the role they played. You don't have to carry bitterness. You don't even have to carry the conversation. You just carry the lesson and walk on. It's not indifference. It's emotional maturity. It's choosing peace over performance. And the moment you let go of the need to be understood by the wrong people, you start attracting the ones who truly see you without explanation. Sometimes, the most powerful way to speak is to say nothing at all. The moment you stop trying to fix toxic people is the moment you start reclaiming your energy. And that's not just some fluffy, motivational idea. It's neurobiological. When you're constantly trying to fix someone, trying to soothe their moods, manage their chaos, anticipate their reactions, your nervous system stays locked in a state of hyperarousal. You're not resting, you're not recovering, and you're definitely not thinking clearly. You're surviving. We often confuse compassion with responsibility. We believe that if we just try a little harder, say the right thing, or remain endlessly patient, the person in front of us will finally change. But people don't transform because you contort yourself into the shape of their healing. They transform if they choose to, when they decide to confront the discomfort required for growth. You cannot do that work for them. And the longer you try, the more you begin to lose parts of yourself in the process. You see, your biology is wired for efficiency. Every time you pour effort into managing someone else's emotional world, you're diverting energy away from your own regulation and performance. You're not just wasting time, you're overloading your system. And over time, that shows up in your mood, in your focus, in your ability to stay calm under pressure. When you're carrying the weight of someone else's dysfunction, it doesn't just affect how you feel, it affects how you function. What's powerful is this: you're not obligated to participate in someone else's chaos. You can have empathy and still have boundaries. You can care about someone and still choose not to carry their baggage for them. That's not cruel. It's honest. It's healthy. And neurologically, it's necessary. One of the biggest signs of growth is when you stop asking, how can I fix them? And start asking, why do I think this is my job? That's the shift. When you begin to understand that your responsibility is not to correct or save or repair, but to observe, to discern, and to choose what environments support your own regulation, your own goals, your own peace. That's when you start taking control of your life at the most fundamental level. When you stop trying to fix them, your brain gets space to focus on what actually matters. You're no longer running in circles of emotional management. You're investing in clarity, and clarity is what builds confidence. Confidence in how you respond, confidence in how you navigate relationships, confidence in what you accept and what you no longer tolerate. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care more about truth than fantasy, more about long-term health than short-term comfort. It means you're finally choosing alignment over attachment. You're no longer seduced by potential, you're anchored in reality. Letting go of the urge to fix doesn't always feel empowering at first. It can feel like failure, like you've given up. But the truth is, you're not giving up. You're waking up. You're realizing that love isn't about sacrificing your mental stability for someone else's emotional volatility. It's about showing up fully for yourself so you can show up authentically for others who are willing to meet you there. And from a physiological perspective, that's when everything starts to shift. Your body relaxes. Your mind clears. Your energy returns. Because when you stop fighting to hold someone together, you finally have the freedom to hold yourself upright. The moment you stop trying to fix them is the moment you start healing you. Most people think the smartest thing to do when you're dealing with toxic behavior is to fight fire with fire. Match energy. Speak louder. Be more forceful. But here's the truth that most people overlook. Real strength isn't in reacting. It's in regulating. When you learn how to regulate your internal state regardless of what's happening around you, that's when you become unshakable. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean it literally. Your nervous system is a feedback loop. It's always scanning your environment, looking for cues. Am I safe? Am I under threat? Can I relax? When someone toxic enters your space, their behavior becomes one of those cues. And if you're not conscious of it, your system will react, spiking cortisol, shifting your breathing, shortening your attention span. Suddenly, you're no longer making choices, you're reacting on autopilot. You're no longer responding from clarity, you're stuck in reactivity. What changes the game is when you flip that loop, when you become the source of regulation, not the result of chaos. You train your body to stay grounded even when someone else is trying to pull you off center. You train your breath, your posture, your internal dialogue to remain steady even when they're pushing every one of your buttons. Why is that so powerful? Because the moment you stop being easily triggered, you take away their power. Toxic people rely on your reactivity. They feed off it. They provoke, they twist, they manipulate, not because they're strategic masterminds, but because they've learned it gives them a sense of control. When you don't play that game, when you don't react the way they expect, it disrupts the pattern. It short-circuits their influence. And more importantly, it preserves your clarity. You can't always avoid toxic people. You'll find them in workplaces, in family systems, even in social circles. But what you can control is the way you engage, or more precisely, the way you choose not to engage. You can observe without absorbing. You can set boundaries without escalating. You can walk away without explaining. And you can remain calm without being passive. One of the most misunderstood ideas is that calm equals weak. But calm is not weak. Calm is precise. Calm is composed. Calm is the result of a highly trained nervous system that doesn't get hijacked by external noise. That's what makes it so effective. You become the thermostat in the room, not the thermometer. You set the tone, you regulate the atmosphere, and you decide how far something goes. You're not waiting for them to change so you can feel better. You've already decided who you are, how you respond, and what you allow into your emotional ecosystem. This kind of emotional control doesn't come from suppressing feelings. It comes from integrating them, from doing the internal work, from learning to sit with discomfort without letting it take over. And that's not something you do once. It's something you train every day. Through breathwork, through intentional routines, through self-awareness practices that sharpen your ability to choose your response rather than be dragged by your reaction. The highest level of power is not how loud you can get, it's how calm you can stay when everything around you is trying to pull you into chaos. Hold your ground. That's where your power is. At the end of the day, the way we deal with toxic people isn't just about protecting ourselves from others. It's about rising into the version of ourselves that no longer needs to match dysfunction with dysfunction. It's about creating a space within us that is clear, steady, and unfazed by chaos. Because real power isn't loud, it's not reactive. Real power is quiet, it's deliberate, and it's rooted in self-respect. When you stop chasing control and start mastering your response, you stop playing by their rules. And that's when you win. Not because they changed, but because you did.